Welcome to Paying Attention, where me, Nicholas Gruen, and Peyton Bowman, my friend, talk about a bunch of things that are on our mind. This week, we're going to go on with something we've spent 2 weeks talking about, which is a diagram, which Peyton might put up on the screen as I speak. Do you want to just roll that? To that one. So there are 4 basic ideas in that, and we're going to talk about those ideas as public goods. And so that's our topic, and I'll hand over to Peyton.
So, I guess the basic question is, what is a public good? This sounds like an idea from economics, so I'm sure the economists watching this will be very familiar with it, but how would you put it in your words?
Sure. So this is where I started, and I've been thinking about this for a long time. And a public good is a simple concept from economics, and that's one of the good things about economics. One of the good things and one of the bad things about economics is that it deals with very simple, very powerful ideas, and that's why it can be such an insight. It can give you such supervision when you look at something, as in supervision, not supervision. It can give you a very powerful lens through which to look at the world. And of course, if you take it too seriously, it then blows up the world because you think that's all you can, that's all that is in the world. And this particular idea is a distinction which comes up in economics, and it emerged as a problem. And this is the problem, that there are a whole lot of things that turn up in the market. And it's great that they turn up in the market, because if you can get the market to work well, the market does miracles. As Adam Smith said, it's not from benevolence that that the butcher, the baker, or the brewer supply me with their goods, but their own concern with their own self-interest. Now, if you can make that work in a market, the market will be very responsive to everyone's needs. It'll be responsive to the consumer's needs. It's also responsive to the producer's needs. If the producer wants to go on holiday, well, the producer can work out what that's going to cost them, and they can make their own decisions for their own benefit. So economists fall in love with the market. It's very hard to have an economist who hasn't fallen in love with the market. Even some Marxist economists fall in love with the market, because markets are miraculous when they in their own domain, in the domain where they work well. And where they work well is with private goods. Now, the top line of that diagram describes cars, and cars are private goods. And think about the difference between the cars built by private competitive firms, almost all cars, and the cars built by governments behind the Iron Curtain back in the days of the Soviet Union. They were pretty awful cars. So cars are an area where markets work incredibly well. Everyone's competing with everyone else. They're trying to make they're trying to make cars better and better and better. And then when someone comes along with a new idea like Elon Musk, why don't we just get going with electric cars? We manage to do extraordinary things there as well. Now, there's a problem, and the problem is the cars are useless without roads. And roads are therefore a problem, because like you drive your car out of the front door and you think, all right, well, where do I buy a road? Well, you can't buy a road. A road is a public good. There's various technical characteristics of what a public good involves. In fact, I'll tell you what they are without explaining them. They're things you can't exclude someone from. For instance, if I build a road, if I build a suburban road that connects with my driveway, it's very hard for me to charge everybody to use that. That's one characteristic of a public good. Anyway, economists think of public goods as this thing that the market won't provide, and therefore a problem that gets solved by government. And private goods are provided via competition, and public goods are typically provided via cooperation. A government is a mechanism whereby everyone cooperates, everyone coerces themselves into paying tax, and they end up with a public good. Long explanation of what a public good is, and you can see why that's an important thing for economists to think about. Now, the more I thought about this, the more I thought that that this complementarity between private and public, between the private and the shared, is, the more I looked, the more I saw that it was more than just in commodities. It's sort of true everywhere. So the most dramatic explanation, it's true of any human interaction of any significance. So the most dramatic way I can make the point is to refer to this conversation. The conversation, firstly, is using a public good. It's using several public goods. It's using the language of English. Well, the market didn't produce that good. It's an incredibly valuable good, and we share it at the same time as you, Peyton, me, Nicholas, are different people. We are trying to benefit from each other's individual existence, even though I'm not letting you get a word in edgeways right now. And we are working on a joint project, and we are working on something shared. Now imagine that now think about anything you do in your life. Anyone watching this, if you make some, if you have a meal, if you go to work, if you have a conversation, then there are these private and shared aspects of all of these things. And so it's that idea that I think really is quite I've not heard people talk like this before, and it's a very neutral idea and a very non-ideological idea with which to recomplicate our thinking about society without working out what faction you belong to, whether you're a liberal or a socialist or a Marxist or anything else. This is a really elemental description of what our lives need to consist of if they're going to amount to anything at all, what a conversation needs to consist of, what an organization needs to consist of, what a community needs to consist of, and so on. Yeah. And that is where I sort of started and where I ended up with that diagram that we've just seen. And now I'm going to stop. Sorry I went on so long.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you bring up this idea of, like there's a competitive layer and a cooperative layer. And what I think is interesting about the language example is that people who, you might go to talk to somebody and you might not know exactly how the level of competition that might be between you. Like I could be meeting you and you could want to, I don't know, you'd want to we could be like the greatest enemies possible. But at the other end of the spectrum, we could be very much aligned. But that use of that good doesn't change. And so there's almost this kind of stability there, whereas the competition can be, I don't know, maybe stronger or weaker in that private area. So,
and the thing is that if you want to make this very general point, then you have to make this picture of what is in the private sector and what is in the public sector a richer one than economists have.
Yeah.
So, in economists' imaginations, if not actually exactly in the economy, but in economists' imaginations, private sector firms compete with each other. But you and I know that if in this conversation we might compete, we might joke, we might do any number of things. We might play. And all of those things, if we're playing with each other rather than with our own thoughts, all of those things have to have a shared element as well. So it's this idea that everything of any significance in our lives can be unpacked into a shared into a shared aspect, and an aspect that's about us in our subjectivity, or as some kind of private about us in some kind of private sense.
Yeah. Well, interesting. Yeah. I mean, I think you had a good example. You told me a little bit before about another area where kind of cooperation just sort of immediately, or what's the word, spontaneously kind of springs up, and
yeah,
that is this the line, or as you say in Australia, the queue.
Yes, that's right.
So yeah, speaking of a kind of
to keep that in mind for our videos, not these videos, but I'm doing some explainer videos, and I hadn't even thought about that, so I need to go on.
But yeah, so this is an interesting example. We have an image on screen, and
yeah,
where does this come from? And is there something about it that's I don't know, uniquely human, or is this something we see throughout nature?
Yeah.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So we slip into this behavior. Now, it's partly given to us by our culture, because there are some cultures that are more loath to queue or to get up in a line than others. But we certainly, in lots of cultures, people just slip into this behavior. And if you look at the people in that line, what they're not, I was going to say what they're thinking. Now, they're not actually, some of them are looking at their phones and all the rest of it, but they know the rules of this queue, and they know that the rules there's a trade going on, and the trade is between me and them. And the trade is, if I treat this queue with the rules of the queue, the implicit rules of the queue, which is the line, the mechanism for rationing access to this office, which is this official, which is going to put us through to the plane, then other people will respect. If I respect other people's place in the queue, they will respect my place in the queue. Mm. And that's a classic example that's a beautiful, simple example of the sort of thing that I'm talking about, that a social institution is this dialectic between self and others, if you like, a social contract between self and others. I have the next slide, the next picture this is actually from an explainer video, has another species very close to us, their attitude to this. You can't get chimps to queue. You can't get something you and I would do, Peyton, if we were moving furniture, is that I might grab hold of one end of a couch or a sofa, and you grab hold of the other end, and we both understand that we are part of joint intentionality. We intend to move this sofa from this room through that door into that room. And chimps just don't get that. Yeah. You might be able to put a huge amount of training into a chimp to do something a little bit similar, but it is incredibly natural for us, and it turns up in infants, about 18 months, this idea that we will do something. Shared intentionality is the building block of human life, and it's a bit like fish not knowing that they're swimming in water. We are pretty unaware of it. Yeah. That's a kind of fundamental thing, and we've got a few more pictures here where we can show this idea of collective intentionality making itself felt, and and the public and the shared being brought out. There's the picture. If you ask me a question if you like, otherwise I'll go on.
I think. Well, I want to mention one thing about the monkey example you gave earlier. You said another time, just carrying a sofa is one thing. We don't expect chimpanzees to have much thinking about sofas, but just lifting a log and moving a log, two people carrying a log from one place
Same
to
thing.
another
Yeah,
is
yeah, yeah.
something they just don't do.
They don't do it. They don't
And
do
you
it.
can't
They
teach
don't
them.
hold down a branch for another person to pick a piece of fruit. An example I'm very familiar with in Australia, I grew up on a farm, and one of the things you'll do when you come to a fence is one person will stand with their 4 foot, no, what is it, the bit from your foot to your knee, and they'll
Yeah.
put that in the spokes of the fence, in the wire in the fence, and then the other person walks through it, steps through it, and then on the other side, the other person reciprocates.
Yeah.
That's just not that doesn't happen in the animal world.
Yeah.
So this is in many ways the most elemental way we can find to describe what's different between us, and it's around that capability of shared intentionality that everything that distinguishes human beings, all our institutions, there's a game of tennis, and a bunch of other things are built on this incredibly rich substrate of shared intentionality.
Yeah. Well, in tennis, but tennis is a pretty competitive game. I mean, but
Pretty cooperative game too.
yeah. Well, so you certainly have these rules as you've written here. I mean, what else? I could see rules being a public good, and you have this person who's being instituted as a judge. But what about the other elements of tennis?
Well, the point about this is that we, in the modern world, think of competition. We think of competition as a thing, as a concept, which sort of stands on its own. But here is this diagram shows you that the competition is built on a ground which is shared. And if you don't share the ground, you don't get the competition. You just get a screaming match.
Yeah.
So the whole point about this is that we kind of fetishize this idea of how competitive a game of tennis between Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal might be. And yes, it is. And the only way, and how, how unbelievably refined their skills become in the crucible of that competition. And what we miss is the fact that it's like the fish, it's all happening in water. What we miss is that the only way those things can come into existence is on a firm base that is shared between them. What's shared between them? Well, the court is shared between them. The net is shared between them. The rules are shared between them. And if they're not, if those things are not provided, in fact, at quite a high level of cooperation between them, including enforced cooperation, which is sort of what a referee or an umpire is all about, then there won't be much competition. It'll be a degraded competition, and they won't ever learn the kind of extraordinary skills that people pay such good money and spend so much of their valuable time watching.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking too about just being on that court. I don't think I would get a chance to play Roger Federer in tennis. I mean, I don't think he would want to play me very much. I don't think I would do very well against him. So there's also this level at which the kind of more the more competitive you become, the more alike you are to your opponent in some sense too, right?
Well, yeah, but remember our diagram, the thing that makes me think of is merit. That on this shared basis, because there's such a powerful and simple sense of what is shared, then that provides a platform for merit to just go through the roof. Yeah. And you and I can have a game, and we'll never, we won't greatly. The whole point of playing tennis with each other will be very different to Roger and Rafa's, what they're trying to do on the tennis court. But it creates a world. And And so you had the slide up earlier, that slide that we go on to, because the tennis game provides an opportunity to illustrate this next line of this next conclusion to which I come, which is that all these institutions require a healthy ecology between the public and the private. And what is an unhealthy ecology? Well, in a line trying to get into a plane, a line of people queuing to get up on into a bus, an unhealthy ecology is someone who comes along and thinks to themselves, well, I know, this would be pretty cool. Everyone else will respect my place in the line, but I'll just make a few exceptions for their place in the line. I'll push in a bit. And if you do that, you degrade the whole structure. Maybe one person doing it, it just gets people upset. Another person doing it gets people not only upset, but trying to take their own chances. And then if everyone's doing it, you don't actually end up with the queue at all. You get a lot of angry people. You get none of the social utility that you got out of the queue. Everyone's piling onto the, trying to get into the bus. It's a nightmare, okay? It doesn't work. And in every one of these cases, and we can go to an illustration of the tennis court now, in every one of these cases, now if you go to the next picture, I think, so here we're talking about an unhealthy ecology of the private and the shared, or public and private goods. And what would that be like? Well, here it's a tennis court where there's a fair bit of competition and we take away the umpire. Well, what happens there is that's a simple illustration where players realise they're very keen to win, and you and I probably wouldn't be that keen to win, who knows. But if it's very competitive people, maybe they're very good at tennis too, it matters to them where they're ranked, they're going to be spending a lot of their time trying to work out how they can cheat or how they can bend the rules, how they can claim that balls were in when they were out, or they're not sure. And so the shared element of the game is compromised, and then the whole thing becomes a pretty crap institution. Yeah. So in all of these cases, including our conversation, where I might decide that I'm really here to show that I'm just an incredibly clever fellow, and really Peyton's just not too bright and he just needs a bit of, that's going to make me feel good. Well, that makes for a bad conversation. It's likely to make for a bad conversation. You might think, yes, well, he's a bit of a smart ass. I'm going to try and ask him a question that is still slightly misrepresents what he just said. I'll trip him up. And so, well, I've just described a political interview or any number or a political debate. That's our world is just mired in this stuff. And that's why these thoughts of mine might sound abstract, but that's what they're trying to get at. They're trying to get at this bloody shit show we're in.
Well, I think we saw a dramatic case of this recently at the Oscars, right? So Chris Rock is up on the stage and everyone, the understanding is a comedian can make jokes and you're just supposed to laugh. And if you don't like them, well, maybe you can protest on Twitter, or you could say you could say something. But what was so shocking about that experience is that the actor got up on stage, which is a sort of a space which is supposed to be, only for the performers, only for people who are invited on the stage, and he physically attacked the comedian in response. And regardless of what you think about that, and there was certainly a breakdown in that idea of what was the shared idea here, and it led to a kind of chaotic situation, which I don't think most people are very happy about the outcome of that. So.
I agree. Let's say something more about it, which is that the culture of the West, let's say it happened 70 years ago, one of the things that would have happened is that it might have been hushed up, or if not hushed up, reported with a real tone of regret that it occurred. But what it turned into was the thing that everyone talked about. Why? Because they can get links clicked, eyeballs watching. That's what they were on about. So at that point, you would hope that all the broadcasters they're actually part of the shared space. They're actually trying to, they're like, we're all watching what's happening at the Academy Awards. If we're watching the program, where the technology that gets us there is just part of what we share. And all of us, but of course, it's also provided by competitive firms. So this is a good example of how we've got the picture of the private and the shared and the tennis court up there, how the private, the competition for private benefit just starts to degrade the ecology of the shared and the private. And that is exactly what happened. We're all incredibly used to this now. That's exactly what happened with the episode at the Academy Awards, which is that a part of our culture, a part of our institutions, which should represent, in some sense, holding the centre of the shared goods, the public goods, actually, they're all too busy trying to make money and get eyeballs clicking, that if they have to degrade the public square in order to do it, well, that's what they're there for.
Yeah.
And that's our problem, that these shared values are just endlessly, we've set up a system in which the shared values are endlessly attacked.
Yeah. But I like this diagram too, which I just put up here, and you have the private sphere has turned into this shark that's consuming the shared, and I think it's a very good illustration in a way of what happened. You know, everything that we value about having a civil awards show, it's supposed to be about recognizing quality in movies, got turned into this sort of vicious discussion of violence and you know, what was okay and what things were said that shouldn't have been said and so forth, and you know, exploited by people who were you know, trying to make money, get viewers based on it. But well, you have this word here, oligarchy. Well, what does oligarchy have to do with this?
Well, essentially, what we have, oligarchy means rule by the few, and the other idea about oligarchy is that it compromises. What's wrong with oligarchy? What's wrong with rule by a few? Well, in Aristotle's terminology, he provides a good version of a style of government and a bad version of a style of government, and he contrasts aristocracy, which is also rule by the few, and oligarchy. And the difference is that with an aristocracy, rule by the few, and this is I think modern people would recognise this as only an ideal, hardly easy to bring about, but you can get more and less of it, but you often get rather less of it. But with an aristocracy, the idea is that the few who rule are the virtuous, the meritorious, the wise, and an oligarchy, those who rule are people who rule ultimately for their own interests. And so that's the idea here, that our modern society has nodes of great power, and it's kind of understood in those nodes of power. There isn't even an aspiration much to value the public good. You'll find, you know, they'll have a list of values and all kinds of stuff, but all of the drivers towards profit are for this node of power, this node of corporate. You know, if they're a network, I happen to think Fox News is particularly bad, but it doesn't really matter there wouldn't have been many networks that said, let's play down let's not give too much oxygen to Chris Rock and the other fellow, Will Smith, who slapped him. Let's just do something a bit countercultural and just talk about the other things that happened at the Academy Awards. Yeah. And in fact, I remember back in 1983 when Australia won the America's Cup off the Americans for the first time ever. The Americans lost this sailing boat race called the America's Cup. And on our ethnic channel, which was called SBS, Special Broadcasting Service, the whole country, the Prime Minister more or less called an impromptu national holiday. It was an extraordinary event. And on the SBS News, it was covered in the sports section at the end of the evening. So at the end of the bulletin. Yeah. And I thought that showed a lot of class, which it just said, look, it's sport. It certainly goes at the top of the sporting news, but we're not going to turn it into a big thing. Now, that's a values thing, and it wasn't wicked and terrible that people had different views. But this idea, but it was, what it did say was that we exist to be a certain sort of institution, and sometimes that will conflict with maximising our viewership and pleasing our viewers, and so be it. That's part of our role. And there's just not much of that about. Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting. So I think we can maybe come back then to this chart. And, we were talking about, now that we have a sense of, okay, how public and private institutions can work together, how they should work together. Yep. How does our discussion of isegoria and parrhesia inform this model?
So I think what we've now done is we've explored a number of aspects of the way I think of public goods, the public goods of our culture, if you like. And these principles are principles that the thing about all of these principles, all four principles you can see there, is that they are aspects of our culture that need to live in the culture as public goods. They can't be, if we try to deliver them by getting everyone to compete, they will destroy them. So they are these qualities that we want to be emergent in our society, qualities, principles by which we live that are, and if that sounds terribly idealistic and all the rest of it, it's not, because just think of the queue. People mostly behave themselves in a queue. They get it. They know what the queue's about. And if they, there's psychologists who've done experiments on queues, and there are quite a few people who push into queues. But what in this psychological experiment, it was Stanley Milgram, who's famous for some other experiments, but one of the things he did was he paid people to push into queues. Well, this gave them massive amounts of anxiety. This is one of the most unpleasant things they'd ever had to do. They lost sleep over it and so on. So these things are built into us, and we will do them better and worse. But it's these principles that we've spoken about in the two videos before this. This is the hard part, if you like. We can support them with rules, but they have to kind of live in us, and they have to live in us as part of the texture of our shared intentionality with others and our general tendency as human beings to rather do the right thing than the wrong thing. I don't want to, in another video, I've said I don't kind of believe in heroes particularly. I'm not suggesting we need to be heroic, but most human beings want to get on with other human beings. That's what's different about us. This quite elaborate and subtle apparatus for living in and with a community of other people. And that's what's we've kind of in quite subtle ways often to do with worshipping competition, worshipping success, and then having social institutions that mirror that and provide huge rewards to people who have put their own interests ahead of others. We've been living on our capital. We've been living on our social capital. I was going to use the Australian expression, white-anting our social capital, and white ants, for the benefit of people who don't know, are termites. We've been eating away at the things that are most precious to our flourishing together. And I reckon these concepts that I'm cooking up are simple and kind of not very ideological ways to try and think about what the problem is, and therefore think about ways to solve those problems. And of course, there are institutions, which we'll talk about in other videos and have talked about a little already in previous videos. There are institutions. It's not just, I'm not just giving people a pep talk. There are institutions, choices between different ways of doing things that can protect us against excesses of competition, that can draw out our innate desire to cooperate with each other.
Well, I think that's very well said, and gives a lot of brings up a lot of interesting topics to explore.
It does.
So
let's hope.
Well, and I think this was a really great conversation, and I think, if people want to learn more, they can find you, Nicholas, at your Twitter account, nruin1, and also at your Substack, which is on the screen. And also you can see my contact information as well. So thank you all very much, and looking forward to our next conversation.
Thanks.